Hello, I am Suzanne Ross, and I am so delighted to be hosting this year's annual Beyond the Matrix event in Sedona. This Sedona event and adventure includes not just presentations, but tours into the powerful vortex sites of Sedona. This event features Andrew Collins, Laura Eisenhower, Brad Olson, Brooks Agnew, and Maria Wheatley. I am so delighted to introduce to you Master Dowser, Maria Wheatley. She is a master dowser and a leading authority on the geodetic system of Earth energies. She was taught how to decode and divine the land by her late father, Dennis Wheatley, who was considered to be one of UK's top master dowsers. Maria is an accomplished author of books on sacred sites and dowsing. She combines her knowledge of archaeology and earth energies, along with state-of-the-art equipment, to locate hidden frequencies that the earth emits. Believing in the earth force or dowsing is simply not enough for Maria. She wants to show the world that the prehistoric designers of ancient sites could locate and harness earth energies. Her findings challenge our understanding of sacred sites, and Sedona, Arizona is certainly one of Earth's most treasured sacred sites. We're so delighted that she'll be coming to Sedona to help us locate intersecting points of the Earth's currents right here in the city with some of the most powerful vortices in the world, sacred Sedona. Please stay tuned for my interview with Master Dowser, Maria Wheatley, and then go to beyondthematrix.tv to register for a tour with her today.
My father was considered the UK's top master dowser, and he himself inherited all the unpublished surveys of another master dowser, which I have inherited. And so I've come from sort of like two past master dowsers, who both of whom's work I have carried on and added to in my own way and done my own discoveries. So really I had a head start, I guess, than the most dowsers, because, you know, I kind of grew up with it but matured with it.
And so when you say matured with it, you have advanced the techniques or discovered new ways of determining ley lines?
Yeah, I've done a kind of feminine principle with dowsing, because a lot of the guy dowsers, having a dad and knowing master dowsers, which predominantly male, I realized there was a kind of lack of empathy with the earth herself. So some dowsers would just say, show me this, show me that, and expect the rods and the land to communicate, which they do, but there was no relationship, no connection, no deep understanding, and no recognition, and no emotion. So my way of dowsing is kind of a spiritual, feminine way that allows us to reconnect with Gaia by understanding the pattern she makes, what those energy pattern means, how does that react to our body, and how can we work with it today? Because I believe that the ancient legacy of decoding the land can be applied to a modern generation. So we need to kind of recognize these ancient patterns that Gaia has continually emitted, but be able to work with them. And that's what I find very exciting.
Hugh Newman talks about the Michael and Mary lines. Can you discuss that?
Hamish Miller and Paul Broadhurst, who actually discovered the Mary and Michael currents, Hamish didn't really want them to be called lines, because the Mary and Michael currents are very common throughout the world. They're a yin earth current and a yang earth current that entwines a ley line. I've discovered further currents other than Mary and Michael in the Stonehenge environs, for instance, called Catherine and Peter. I knew Hamish Miller very well, and I was at his book launch for the Mary and Michael currents. So we need to think of them not as lines. That's such a misnomer if we call them lines. Imagine the caduceus symbol, and the caduceus symbol has a line with two serpents entwined in it. That's called a ley system. That's the St. Michael ley line that has the Michael current and the Mary current entwined in it, but they are common. And sadly, the Mary and Michael currents in the UK, in southern Britain, got Christianized by loads of church placements upon them. If we look to other ley systems, such as the Ellen and Bolinas earth current, discovered by Gary Bilcliffe, and my own earth current discoveries of Catherine and Peter, they haven't been Christianized. They're still fully prehistoric and pagan because they have less churches on them. So whilst I think the Mary and Michael currents are very powerful, I don't see them in their purity as our ancient ancestors would have worked with them.
And so you say that you discovered the Catherine and Peter lines at Stonehenge?
Yeah, well, for example, Hamish's work that Hughes has spoken about really is a ley line that was orientated to the May Day sunrise. That's the Beltane sunrise on May the 1st, and the Samhain, the Halloween sunset, on October the 31st. That ley line is orientated to it, which was discovered initially in the 1960s by the master geomancer John Michell. John Michell pointed out that that ley was probably engineered by man to be manipulated to that particular sunrise and sunset, cannot be coincidental. Now, in my own work of looking at the ley line that goes through and very close to Stonehenge, it's more than that. It is orientated towards Christmas Day when the sun is climbing north. And more than that, so it has a sun alignment to it. It has certain sites that are sited upon that ley that represent the orbital paths of the planets. So what do I mean by that? For example, in the middle of Avebury and Stonehenge, you had a mighty superhenge called Mardenhenge. It's no longer visible like Avebury and Stonehenge because agriculture has ploughed it out. Some of the stone and wood settings got removed in antiquity. But nonetheless, you can still see the henge there. Now that represents the orbit of Mars. And when we look at the old meaning of Marden, Den is an old English word for settlement or farmstead or, community. And Mar means the community of Mars, the farmstead of Mars. So I showed this to an astronomer friend of mine, this whole system, and you've got Venus and you've got Mercury and you've got Saturn on this ley that I'll be showing in Sedona conference because it takes leys that one step further, okay? And with this astronomical planetarium that surrounds Avebury, the astronomer friend of mine said what they were doing, they was laying out ancient sites in the landscape using the astronomical unit of the Earth to the planet in the heavens. Now that is advanced astronomy, okay? That's knowing the distance in space and applying that to the ground. So these are cosmological sites that unite with planetary forces. So that takes us beyond just Earth currents, but there are Earth currents entwining that ley as well. So this ley system has everything. It has an alignment to the sun, but it has alignments to the planets that are absolutely spectacular. And we're coming up to a planetary conjunction of Saturn and Pluto soon, and Jupiter will join in, so to speak. So I am sure that these sites on that ley line that links Avebury to Stonehenge and far beyond are going to be activated this year.
I've always been so fascinated by archaeoastronomy. And so are you saying that Stonehenge represents the sun and it's surrounded by areas that would be in alignment with these planets?
What the system does is this. There's a wondrous site near Avebury called Silbury Hill. It's the largest man-made structure in northwest Europe. It's a huge mound that has a chalk step pyramid beneath it. That represented Earth in this planetary lay system, okay? Avebury Henge represented the sun and the moon. Then there was a site to Venus, a site to Mars, a site to Jupiter, but Stonehenge itself, and this, the first really discovery of this was by an antiquarian called Edward Duke in the 19th century that found the map outlining these orbits, which I extended to include Uranus and Neptune and Pluto, the outer Saturnian planets, because it stopped at Saturn. So it was the Reverend Edward Duke that found this map, and Saturn is Stonehenge. It represents the Lord of Time. Okay.
No kidding. I've often thought of it as some kind of clock, some kind of solar clock. So yes, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is a solar clock, and it's an astronomical temple as well. But more than that, I think symbolically, when we look to it, takes Saturn 29 to 30 years to do an exact round of the ecliptic belt, okay? And that's why at the ages of about 29, 30, we have what's called our Saturn return. Saturn takes that amount of time to go round the ecliptic belt through all of the 12 signs of the zodiac to come back to its placement. And it's intriguing to note that there's, 30 standing stones making the outer circle at Stonehenge itself. So I think there's a symbolic correlation there. And the 29th stone is very tall in Stonehenge as well. So I think it really symbolizes the energies of Saturn as well as the sun. And when we look to Stonehenge as well, the lunar alignments are far more accurate than the solar alignment, okay? Now, when Gerald Hawkins wrote his very famous book entitled Stonehenge, of all titles about Stonehenge, he was about 2 meters, 4 feet away from the center when he filmed that sunrise coming over the Heelstone, because all archaeoastronomers of merit and of worth and education know that that is a weak alignment. It's off by a degree. Now, when you start to look, as as Newham in the 1960s looked at the lunar alignments at Stonehenge, it becomes more apparent that the accurate lunar alignment is at the moon's standstill cycle, which happens once every 9 years at Stonehenge. Now, when the moon is at its standstill, it rises full exactly above the Heelstone, okay? 100% accurate, not out by a few degrees, as when they widened the entrance to Stonehenge, it kind of made it more near to the summer solstice sunrise. But more than that, Gerald Hawkins in the 1960s observed and calculated in depth that if there was a lunar standstill moon at its fullness at Stonehenge and it coincided with an eclipse round about midwinter, it would rise majestically blood red above the Heelstone, 100% accurate. So when people look at Stonehenge and they always say it's about the sunrise, good archaeoastronomers will point out, since the work of Newham and Gerald Hawkins and others besides, that is more of a lunar accuracy monument.
And so with this direct alignment of these structures on the ground and these objects in the sky, these planetary alignments, if you will, solar and lunar alignments, how do the currents relate to the cosmos?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And in 1999 in the UK, it was a rare moment and an event. We had a total eclipse, and that is so rare for the British Isles. So Hamish Miller, who I said discovered the Mary and Michael currents, my late father, myself, and other master dowsers were asked to join in a huge experiment to douse the currents at the moment of the total eclipse at particular ancient sites spread across the southwest, and some incidentally were in Scotland, which wasn't totality. But what we wanted to do was really understand what was going on, and we all got the same Dowsing response. The earth goes quiet at an eclipse. It's if the energies, the earth energies, disappear momentarily, and then they reboot with a little bit of strength. So just as the birds go quiet at a solar eclipse, the energies within the earth do so as well, making it quite a poetic moment for all to witness and understand.
And so the currents then are directing energy. It creates an energetic force between these sites. Is that the idea, is to connect then these sites? And if so, what does that have to do with consciousness?
They do connect the sites. Imagine this, the ley line goes right the way through. If you're talking about Hamish Miller and John Michel's work, it goes from Carnival in Cornwall to Hopton on the Norfolk coast. But the earth currents, Mary and Michael, that entwine it, hit more ancient sites. Now, according to Chinese geomants, and this was written down in 2200 BC by probably the most famous emperor called Yu, spelled Y-U, okay, Emperor Yu, and he was a dowser, and he was said to raise consciousness and the fertility of the earth as well. And all the Chinese geomants and feng shui masters have said negative energy, which they call sha qi, flows too fast along a straight line. You do not live above a ley. It can cause far too much energy to flow. You just have that beautiful horseshoe bow, yeah, that is iconic and of their house structure, and that's to allow the qi to slow down. So qi travels far too fast in a straight line on the ley, but round the earth currents, they slow down and meander and become more powerful in the land. With the ley system is working with the yin and the yang currents, for instance. And I've also discovered yin and yang currents, which I'm going to share at Sedona in ancient Egypt at the temple of Abydos. So we know that there are far, far more ley systems, and a good experienced dowser can kind of decode them, map them out, and understand them. And I dowsed with Hamish Miller with the Mary and Michael lines, one of the few dowsers that did, because he's passed over now. Back in the 1980s was the first time I dowsed with him. So I know quite a bit about earth currents. Now, it was pointed out in ancient China, where they cross is of special importance. Yeah, that's where a Chinese emperor would put his palace or his temple. And where they cross allows, almost like our left brain and our right brain, to balance. It brings us into spiritual balance and physical balance so that our consciousness can be raised. But my own experiments with earth currents done with Rodney Hale, who I know Andy Collins has the most utter respect for, because Andy Collins has worked with Rodney Hale as well. Rodney joined me at Avebury to test out the hertz frequency of the earth current Mary, the female earth current. And what we got in the near center of the current was a hertz frequency that can bring your brain into sort of more like alpha mode, if you were on that, okay, which puts you in more of a meditative state. So just by being on the energy current can bring your brain into a more calm modality as well. And when we start working with that type of energy, we can really advance ourselves. And in working with these energies and bringing people into their spiritual and physical balance, more people seem to identify sometimes with their soul's divine purpose. They're in that balance, you see, they're in that harmony, and suddenly they have a self-understanding, or that eureka moment where they know who they are and what they should be doing. I have witnessed time and time again. them. And they're the kind of energies that are entwined into ancient sites. But one of the most powerful forms of earth energy, as Hamish himself pointed out, can make an earth current veer off into an odd direction. And it made Hamish think, why did the earth current whiz off in that direction? It's because deep, deep below the ground, you have female water, yin water, that is born within the womb of Gaia, independent of rainfall. Now, geologists would disagree with that and say that's impossible, but in the future it will be found out that planetary bodies generate their own water supply, and it wasn't through the bombardment of comets carrying water to our planet that made the oceans. It's been perpetually made within Gaia, just like uranium is, and sulfur and gold and potassium and all of those rare rich mineral. So groundwater, that's rainwater that's falling from the skies and it's filled up the aquifers. That's groundwater, and they would recognize the sacred water by the spiral pattern. And what the ancients were doing, be that in Egypt, be that in Tuzayu near Sedona, be that at Stonehenge or Avebury, they would put a feature above that geospiral pattern, or they would put a stair, for example, like the altar stone at Stonehenge, the obelisk stone at Avebury, marking the geospiral pattern, and that can change our consciousness quite dramatically. But more than that, water has memory. So when we go to certain parts of ancient sites, we can connect with the Akashic record of the site, everything that ever was, because the water is holding on to the memory of the past. Now, we're made up of 75% of water as well. So some of the work that I've done at ancient sites allows us to cleanse and heal and rejuvenate our own body waters above this sacred, deep water that emits the spiral energy pattern. Because I believe in my consciousness that it's not just our brains that hold on to our memory. Water has memory. My body is that in a particular meditative way above these energy points at sacred sites. We do feel rejuvenated and cleansed. So my work takes on a spiritual role at ancient sites as well. I have studied at Oxford University as well with the archaeologist Lisa Brown. I'm in my third year this year, and so I do of sites as well as a spiritual understanding.
Interesting that you should talk about the brainwave activity in relationship to these areas where there are strong currents. My colleague, Mark Griffin, has a picture that a neuroscientist took of brainwave activity for an individual who had flown into Phoenix, and when they got to Sedona, he took another image, and the brainwave activity was altered to resonate with those states that bring you into a higher meditative, spiritual, state. And so let's talk about Sedona and the structures here and how they may align with the cosmos, and also maybe the areas where you have been and discovered through dowsing those currents.
Yes, well, before I do that, I'd just like to point out that the Knights Templar and secret societies took the pagan design canons of some of their churches and cathedrals and placed the altar above these energy patterns I'm talking about, and you would get an altered sense of consciousness there, exactly the same. They knew this. We're catching up. Okay, we're just catching up with our equipment to what has been known for thousands and thousands of years. So just to get it into perspective, thank the ancestors for that. Well, I think dowsing can really reveal a lot about a site, not just about the grid lines, but in ways in which to work with the energies of the site. Because when we look at a site, for example, like Stonehenge, that has an avenue, a processional way to enter the monument, that would be on either an earth current or a particular type of energy flow. Okay, so you'd be flowing in harmony with the energies prior to even going to a site. When forgive me if I pronounce things incorrectly with some of the American sounds, but at Wupaki, I hope I pronounced near enough.
That's close,
What
yeah.
I noticed there, the way to enter. You say tomato. Yeah, when you go into the kiva, for example, through the entrance, I think I've got the original way that you would have entered it, and not how tourism today enters it, by plotting the energy current that goes in and the direction that it flows into the site. Look at how were the ancients going into a site, because 9 times out of 10 they would walk upon the earth currents as an avenue processional way. So I think kivas were set out like that as well, as were particular entrances, doorways, and even windows. I mentioned earlier, especially at sites like Tuzigut and others as well, cliff dwellings and things like that, because when we look to how the Knights Templar laid out, and they inherited all of the wisdom of the prehistoric peoples of the Bronze Age through the Druids, who then handed it down sometimes to the Knights Templar. And when we look at their layout and foundation plan of ancient sites, some of which again I will be discussing to give a holistic understanding of the different types of people and timelines that energies were integrated into structures, the windows, the doors, the widths, the way you would place them, all in harmony with particular types of earth currents that, again, if we recognize this, we know if we're a male, perhaps we should enter that way. If you're a female, perhaps enter that way. And so on and so forth. We can build up a much deeper understanding of how to use an ancient site by simply knowing what was beneath the ground. And it's very simple to do. It sounds quite complex. How would I recognize that? How would I go about that? But a few core skills, and it's very easy to decode an ancient site.
And so here in Sedona, you talked about Tuzigut, but what about in Sedona proper in the Red Rock temples?
Well, yes, again, they're very helpful. I didn't have that much time with Mark to really understand those sites, okay? So I would have to go back again, because when you're introduced to a site, you know, you can't just kind of decode it. You have to connect with the energies there, and I had a connection. But I would like to go back again before I fully quoted on what I felt was going on. I couldn't just do that within an hour, which going with someone, it would be a falsehood, and it wouldn't do my work justice if I hinted at things. I think I can know a few things that are going on, but when I go back there again, I will douse the area, and then I will have a correct understanding. So sorry to sound so vague.
No worries. We are so very excited for you to come to this magnificent Red Rock paradise of Sedona. And many of us here have tuned into the energies of these red rocks and encountered red rock beings that look like spires, but you know, intricately carved deities and different doorways carved into the red rock that, you know, we have done some interdimensional meditations around. And so it's a magical, mystical place with so many mysteries to be revealed. And I'm sure that your visit will reveal even more of that mystical nature of this ancient land, which has, you know, the red rock iron ore over pure quartz crystal, and is often called the crystal city of light. And so, and like I was saying earlier, Mark Griffin has taken me to spaces, especially near Bell Rock, where there is a very specific grid formation, very straight lines crisscrossing with crystal embedded in them. And if you take the dowsing rods, they line up exactly, with these lines. And so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting ley line revelations here.
Yeah, and I think there's earth currents there as well. So you see, we need to think beyond the ley. Yeah, I mean, this is where a lot of people get fixated on, and the ley, like I explained, isn't the power in the land. We need to go beyond that and look for the earth currents and start to decode the other energies as well. Then we get a huge look at the map. Yeah, we get a huge look at the map. We know what Gaia's doing, and it's when we can see and witness and work with her beauty. And like you say, you've been doing your meditations, you've been working with the energies, you know your land probably very well. So it'd be great for me to come and to experience, other people's understanding of the site, to give a deeper perspective into the energies there as well.
We are so looking forward to it, Maria. And so thank you very much for spending time today, giving us some more insight into the currents that wrap around these ley lines, the Michael and Mary and Catherine and Peter, and the planetary and solar alignments in the UK. I can't wait to understand what planetary and solar alignments we might have here in Sedona, and where and how these currents run through these red rocks.
Thank you.